Imagine the Renaissance, a time of enlightenment, beauty, and giant, floppy hats that defied the laws of physics. It was Giovanni, sweating enough to water a small vineyard, bows deeply. "My lord, you shall have the most rigid, geometric, and perfectly perpendicular city ever conceived by man." He stands before the vast, blank plaster wall, brush in hand, looking at the expanse of white. He takes a deep breath, aims for a straight line representing the horizon, and his brain sends a signal to his hand that says, "Let's make this look like a roller coaster at the end of the world." The first few days were a desperate scramble for survival. Giovanni tried everything. He used a giant, heavy oak ruler, but he gripped it so hard he snapped it in half, creating a jagged, zigzagging mess that looked like a lightning bolt having a midlife crisis. He tried to tie his arm to a plank of wood to force a rigid motion, but he ended up painting a series of frantic, wavy stripes that resembled a zebra having a panic attack. He tried drinking pure, cold water to steady his nerves, but he just ended up needing the bathroom every 5 minutes, which actually helped with the fluidity of his lines, but made the work take 3 times as long. He even tried hypnosis, hiring a local street performer who claimed to be a mystic. The hypnotist put Giovanni into a trance, promising to align his humors with the rigid order of the universe. Instead, the hypnotist convinced him that he was a chicken, so Giovanni spent 3 hours pecking at the wall with his brush, creating a chaotic, textured fresco of tiny, angry dots. When he came out of the trance, he looked at his work, a futuristic city built by a colony of delirious snakes, and panicked. Every line was a chaotic curve, every building was leaning at a 45-degree angle, and the trees looked like they were actively trying to escape the frame. It was a masterpiece of motion in a world of statues. The day of the unveiling arrived. The banquet hall was packed with the elite of Florence. The air smelled of expensive spices and nervous anticipation. Lorenzo paced the room, his face turning a shade of purple that matched his velvet doublet. He had a pair of tailor's shears in his pocket, just in case he needed to procure those bookmarks. Giovanni stood in the corner, clutching a bucket of white paint, ready to whitewash the entire thing and run for the coast. Just as Lorenzo marched toward the curtain, hand outstretched, the local bishop, a man known for his love of wine and obscure theological debates, wandered in. He stopped dead in his tracks. He walked toward the wall, squinting as if looking at a divine miracle. The room went silent. The bishop gasped, pressing his hands against his robes. It's not mere stone," the bishop whispered, his voice trembling with manufactured awe. "It's the fluidity of the cosmos. It's the vibrations of the heavens captured in lime and pigment." The bishop gestured to a crooked archway that looked like a melting candle. "See how the city pulses? It's not a static prison of geometry. It's a living, breathing entity of faith. The lines are not crooked. They are the path of the soul through the trials of life. It's the new wave. Look at these pillars. They are dancing. Truly, Giovanni, you have captured the divine chaos of creation." Lorenzo, terrified of contradicting a bishop and suddenly worried that his own lack of spiritual vision would make him look like a peasant, immediately pivoted. He clapped his hands, his gout-ridden foot giving a painful twitch that he masked as a rhythmic dance step. "Exactly," Lorenzo boomed, forcing a smile that looked like a grimace of agony. I specifically told Giovanni, do not give me those boring, straight lines that everyone else does. Give me the movement of the heavens. Give me the avant-garde." The room erupted into murmurs of agreement. The other nobles, not wanting to be seen as behind the times, began nodding sagely. "Oh, yes," one merchant remarked, adjusting his cape. "The way the windows tilt, it creates an illusion of perpetual afternoon. It's genius." Another chimed in, "The snakes in the architecture. It's clearly a metaphor for the struggle against the rigid structures of the past." Giovanni, who had been preparing to beg for his life, suddenly found himself surrounded by admirers. He straightened his messy hair, cleared his throat, and adopted a look of profound, misunderstood misery. "It was difficult," he said, his voice dripping with false modesty. "To break the shackles of the ruler was a burden only an artist of my specific temperament could bear." The story of the wobbly fresco spread like wildfire. Within a week, Giovanni was the most famous artist in Florence. He began charging double for his shaky style, claiming that his tremors were a gift from the muses. He took on apprentices who were confused as to why they were being told to let their wrists go limp and embrace the noodle. He eventually wrote a book titled The Geometry of the Unstable, which became a bestseller, mostly because people were too afraid to admit they didn't understand why a book about wobbling lines was considered a seminal text on art theory. The moral of the tale, if one chooses to look for one, is that if you can't get it right, just pretend you meant to do it that way. In the end, history is just a series of mistakes that people were too embarrassed to admit were mistakes. Giovanni never did learn to draw a straight line, but he did get a very fancy hat, the floppiest in all of Italy, and a very long line of patrons waiting for their own personal wobbly wall. He spent his final years in a villa on the hills overlooking Florence, surrounded by paintings that made everyone who looked at them feel slightly seasick. He would sit on his balcony, watching the sunset, and occasionally try to draw the horizon. He would watch his hand squiggle, shake, and curve into a loop-de-loop, and he would smile, knowing that he had fooled the world into seeing beauty where others saw only a tremor. So, the next time you find your pen slipping, or your ruler sliding, or your perspective failing, don't despair. You aren't failing, you're just in the middle of a renaissance. Remember Giovanni. Remember the man who turned his inability to draw a straight line into a movement, a legacy, and a very comfortable life. Sometimes, when life gives you tremors, you don't fight them. You just make a revolution, one wobbly line at a time. The world doesn't need more straight lines, it has plenty of those. It needs more people brave enough to draw the spaghetti and call it the architecture of the soul. Giovanni lived a life that was never straight, never narrow, and entirely his own. And in the history books of the future, he wouldn't be remembered as the man who couldn't draw, but as the man who taught Florence how to dance with a brush.